Before the show starts, drop a comment below with where you're watching from, then sit back, relax, and get ready for some chilling stories. I've been a cop for 12 years. In that time, I've seen my fair share of weird cases. Things that don't sit right, things that stick with you. But this one still haunts me. It was a quiet night, a little past 2 a.m. I was parked near an old diner, sipping on bad gas station coffee, when the call came through. 911, what's your emergency? At first, nothing but static. Then a woman's voice, shaky, whispering. Someone's inside my house. My whole body went rigid. Ma'am, are you safe? Are you locked in a room? A pause. Then the sound of footsteps. Not hers. Heavy. Slow. Then, a breath. Not from her. Ma'am, stay on the line. Click. The call cut off. I threw my coffee down, turned on my sirens, and floored it. The address was in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. One of those old two-story houses with wide porches and creaky wooden steps. The kind that always looks just a little too dark at night. I arrived within 5 minutes. No movement. No lights. Just a house sitting in eerie silence. I radioed in, then stepped out of my car, scanning the windows. Nothing. I knocked on the front door. Police. Ma'am, can you hear me? No answer. I tried the handle, unlocked. That sent a shiver down my spine. Hand on my holster, I stepped inside. The house smelled like old wood and something faintly metallic. The living room was neat, too neat. A folded blanket on the couch, a half-finished cup of tea on the coffee table, a TV remote sitting perfectly aligned with the armrest. But there was no sign of the woman. Then I saw it. Her phone, lying face up on the hardwood floor. The screen was cracked. That's when I heard it. A creak. From upstairs. I pulled out my gun and took the stairs slow, each step groaning under my weight. The upstairs hallway was lined with closed doors. I checked the first, empty bedroom. The second, a bathroom. The third, a closet door, slightly open. I swear it had been shut when I passed by seconds ago. The air felt thick, heavy. My breathing sounded too loud in my own ears. Slowly, I reached out and pulled the door open. Empty. Just coats. A few storage boxes. I exhaled, forcing myself to relax. Then, a sound. Soft. Barely there. Breathing. Right behind me. I spun around, gun raised. Nothing. Just the empty hallway stretching back to the stairs. I stood there for a second, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. But there was no one there. Nothing out of place. I exhaled, rubbing my forehead. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe the house was playing tricks on me. I stepped back into the hallway and reached for my radio. Dispatch, I've checked the premises. No sign of. Then the TV turned on. Blasting static. Loud. Deafening. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I rushed downstairs, heart hammering. The living room was just as I left it, except now. The TV was on. One problem. The plug was still out of the socket. I stood there, staring at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then, a voice. Weak. Almost drowned out by the static. Help. I spun around. At the top of the stairs. The woman. Barefoot. Wide-eyed. Staring at me. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. I raised my hand. Ma'am, I'm Officer Henry. Are you okay? She took a step forward, shaking her head violently. Then she whispered something. I barely caught it. He's still here. The blood in my veins turned to ice. Then, a creak. From behind me. I turned fast, gun raised, scanning every shadow of the living room. Nothing. But the air felt wrong. Thick. Heavy. Like the room itself was holding its breath. I turned back to the woman, but she was already moving, rushing down the stairs, gripping the railing so tight her knuckles were white. She stopped a few feet from me, her eyes darting around the room like she expected something to lunge at her. Ma'am, I said, keeping my voice calm. Are you hurt? She shook her head, but she wouldn't stop looking around. He was here, she whispered. Who? Her eyes locked onto mine, wide and filled with something that sent a cold knot twisting in my gut. The man, she said. The man in my house. I swallowed hard. I checked every room. No one's here. She shook her head again. He doesn't hide in rooms. A chill ran down my spine. Ma'am, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Her breath was shallow, fast. I woke up and heard footsteps. I knew I was alone, but she clenched her jaw like she was forcing herself to say the next part. They weren't normal footsteps. He moves slow, careful, like he doesn't want me to know he's there. I felt my grip tighten around my gun. She kept going, voice barely above a whisper. I called 911, but when I was on the phone, I heard breathing, right behind me. I felt my stomach drop. I didn't see him, she continued. I turned around and nothing, but I know he's here. I know he's still here. I glanced around the room, scanning the walls, the corners, the shadows. I had cleared the house. Every room. Every closet. Wait. Except, I turned slowly, eyes landing on the hallway closet by the front door. I hadn't checked that one. It was closed, just like all the others. But now I noticed something. The bottom edge. A slight gap. A crack just wide enough to see inside. I took a step forward, gun steady. The woman sucked in a sharp breath behind me. I reached for the handle. Paused. Listened. Silence. Then, soft. Barely audible. A breath. I yanked the door open, gun aimed. Empty. Just coats. Shoes. Storage boxes. My pulse pounded in my ears. I reached forward, pushing aside the coats. Nothing. I exhaled, about to turn back to the woman when... A whisper. Not behind me. Not beside me. Above me. I froze. Slowly, my eyes lifted. The attic hatch. A thin, rectangular door built into the ceiling. It was slightly open. I stepped back, heart hammering. My fingers tightened around my gun. Then, a shift. Just the faintest sound of movement. Something was up there. I glanced at the woman. Get outside. Now. She didn't hesitate. She bolted toward the door, flung it open, and ran onto the porch. I grabbed my radio. This is Officer Henry. I have a possible intruder in the attic. Requesting backup. I barely got the words out before. The attic hatch moved. Just an inch. Then another. Then, a hand. Pale. Thin. Fingers curling around the edge of the hatch. I stepped back fast, gun aimed. Come down. Now. No response. The fingers twitched. Then, they slid back into the darkness. Silence. I didn't wait. I reached up, grabbed the hatch, and yanked it open. The attic was empty. Dust floating in the stale air. A single light bulb swaying from the ceiling. No footprints in the dust. No signs of movement. Nothing. But the air up there felt suffocating. Like something was watching. Waiting. I climbed down, stomach twisted in knots. By the time backup arrived, the house had been searched top to bottom. Every door locked. Every window secure. Nothing. The woman refused to go back inside. I couldn't blame her. She packed a bag and left that same night. But before I drove away, I glanced up. And froze. In the second floor window. She was standing there. Not the woman. A second figure. Motionless. Watching. Then, it stepped back. And disappeared into the dark. I don't know who or what was in that house. But I do know one thing. The woman wasn't alone. And she never had been. I've been a deputy in this town for 5 years. Nothing much happens out here, just the occasional bar fight, the usual domestic calls. The kind of job that lets you sleep easy at night. At least, that's what I used to think. It was a little past midnight when the call came in. A man had dialed 911 from an isolated stretch of highway outside town. His voice was shaky, frantic. There's someone standing in the road. The dispatcher tried to get more details, but his responses were all the same. He's just watching me. A pause. Heavy breathing. Then, I looked away for a second. Now he's closer. That's when the line cut out. I was dispatched immediately. The road in question was an old back highway, barely used except by truckers trying to avoid the main routes. No streetlights, just miles of empty road flanked by endless fields and thick tree lines. When I arrived, I found the guy's car sitting on the shoulder. Driver's door wide open. Headlights still on, engine running. But no sign of the man. I radioed in. "Dispatch, I've got an abandoned vehicle at the scene. No sign of the driver." The dispatcher asked me to check inside the car. I stepped forward, keeping my hand near my holster. The guy's phone was still in the driver's seat, still connected to the 911 line. That's when I noticed something else. The keys were in the ignition. The driver's seatbelt was unbuckled. And the worst part, there were no footprints. No sign that anyone had walked away. I felt my pulse pick up, but I forced myself to stay focused. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the area, sweeping the trees, the ditches, the endless black of the fields stretching beyond my headlights. Nothing. I called out, "Sheriff's Department. If you're out here, call out." Silence. Then, a rustling sound. From the tree line, about 20 feet ahead. I raised my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on something just beyond the first row of trees. A figure, standing perfectly still. My breath caught in my throat. "Sir?" No movement. No response. Just standing. Watching. I took a step closer. My boots crunched against the gravel. "Sir, if you need help, I need you to." I blinked. He was closer. I stopped. My heart pounded against my ribs. I could have sworn he had been standing farther back. I aimed my flashlight at him again. Now I could see him better. Tall. Thin. Clothes dark and tattered. His face. I couldn't see his face. I stepped back. My training told me to stay calm, to keep control of the situation. But something deep inside me, something primal, was screaming at me to leave. I reached for my radio. "Dispatch, I've got a possible." I blinked. He was closer. My blood turned ice cold. I hadn't looked away. I hadn't moved my light. But now, he was standing just at the edge of the road. I swallowed hard. My fingers tightened around my belt. "Sir, if you take another step, I will." I blinked. Gone. The road ahead was empty. The trees stood silent. But something was wrong. I could still feel him. Watching. Waiting. I took a slow step backward, my every instinct telling me to retreat. I turned toward my patrol car, keeping my flashlight up, scanning every inch of darkness. Then, a sound. Not in front of me. Behind me. Breathing. Slow. Shallow. Coming from inside my car. I froze. The breathing was faint, but it was there. Slow. Steady. Coming from my patrol car. I forced myself to stay calm, gripping my flashlight tighter. My radio crackled in my hand, but I didn't dare speak. I took a slow step toward the car, my fingers brushing the handle of my holster. The windows were dark, too tinted to see inside clearly. But I knew. Someone was in there. I circled the back, trying to keep my breathing steady. I reached for the driver's door, heart hammering, and pulled it open fast. Empty. The seat was just as I'd left it. The radio, the paperwork, even my half-empty cup of coffee. But the air inside? It was warm. Like someone had been sitting there just seconds ago. A chill crawled up my spine. I scanned the road again, my flashlight cutting through the night. The car from the 911 call was still sitting there, untouched. The open driver's door swayed slightly in the wind. No footprints. No movement. Nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I reached for my radio. "Dispatch, I need." A whisper. Right behind me. Not words. Just breath. I spun around, gun drawn. Nothing. The road was empty. The trees silent. But the door to the stranded car? It was shut. My stomach twisted into a knot. I knew I hadn't touched it. I took a shaky step toward it. The air felt thick, heavy, like the whole world had stopped breathing. Then, a soft tap on the back window of my patrol car. I turned so fast I nearly lost my footing. My flashlight beam flickered across the glass. For half a second, just half a second, I saw something. A face. Pale. Hollow eyes. And then, gone. The next thing I knew, my radio was blaring. "Deputy Mark, do you copy?" I snatched it up, voice shaking. "Go ahead." The dispatcher's voice was tight. "We just got another call from this location." My pulse thundered in my ears. "That's not possible," I said. "There's no one here." Silence on the other end. Then, the call came from your radio. I felt every hair on my body stand on end. I didn't wait. I didn't hesitate. I got in my car, slammed the door shut, and peeled out of there, leaving the other vehicle behind. I didn't care. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I never did figure out what happened that night. The missing man was never found. His car sat abandoned on the roadside until it was eventually towed. No one ever came to claim it. But sometimes late at night, when I'm driving that same highway, I see something standing in the distance. And every time I blink, it's closer. I've been a cop long enough to know that most 911 calls aren't what they seem. Drunk dials, accidental pocket calls, kids playing with phones. It happens more than you'd think. But every now and then, a call comes through that sticks with you. The kind that makes your stomach twist, even when you don't know why. This was one of those. It came in at 2:46 a.m. A landline call. No words, no panic, just breathing. Faint. Shaky. Like someone was too afraid to speak. Then, click. The line went dead. Dispatch traced the call to an address on the outskirts of town. A small house, one of those old one-story homes with peeling paint and a porch swing that creaks in the wind. The caller? An elderly woman, 78 years old. Lived alone. I was sent to check it out. When I pulled up, the house was dark. No movement inside. No sign of distress. Just quiet. I knocked on the door. "Ma'am, this is Officer Daniel. We received a 911 call from this address." A long pause. Then, shuffling footsteps. The door cracked open, and there she was, a frail woman, wrapped in a thin robe, blinking at me with tired eyes. "911, she echoed. I didn't call 911. Something about the way she said it made the hair on my arms stand up. I kept my tone calm. "Are you alone in the house, ma'am?" She nodded, then hesitated. "Yes, of course." A small, uncertain pause. I glanced past her. The house was neat, cozy. A floral couch, a TV with the volume low, a few framed photos on the walls. Nothing out of place. But something felt wrong. "Would you mind if I take a quick look around?" I asked. She hesitated again. Then slowly she stepped aside. I entered, keeping my hand near my holster. The air inside felt still. The kind of quiet that isn't just quiet, but waiting. I checked the living room, the kitchen, the small hallway leading to her bedroom. Everything was normal. But then, as I passed by the dining table, something caught my eye. A chair, slightly pulled out, just enough for someone to have been sitting there. Something about it sent a chill through me. I moved on, checking the bedrooms. The closets, the back door, everything was locked. But the feeling wouldn't leave me. I turned back to the woman, standing near the kitchen now, wringing her hands. "Are you sure you didn't call 911? I asked again. She shook her head. "I was sleeping." I nodded. "Where's your phone, ma'am?" She blinked at me. "What?" "Your landline." The call came from inside the house. "Do you keep it by your bed?" Her face went pale. She turned slowly, eyes scanning the room, like she was only now realizing something was wrong. Then, her hands started shaking. "My phone," she whispered. I felt a pit open in my stomach. I followed her gaze to the kitchen counter. Empty. Then I saw it. The drawer. Slightly open. I stepped forward, reached out, and pulled it open. Her landline phone. Inside the drawer. Placed neatly on top of a folded dish towel. I turned to her. "Did you put this here?" She shook her head, her whole body trembling now. "No. I always leave it by my bed." I stared at the phone, my mind racing. Someone had called 911. From this house. And then, they had put the phone away. I stepped back, forcing a calm tone. "Ma'am, do you have any other doors? A basement? An attic?" She shook her head, her breathing uneven. "No, just the main door and the back one." I had checked both. They were locked. I glanced at the walls. The vents. The small, dark spaces I hadn't thought to check. And that's when I noticed. The hall closet. The door wasn't shut all the way. It was open. Just a crack. My pulse picked up. I turned back to the woman. "Ma'am, I need you to step outside for a moment." She didn't argue. She moved quickly toward the front door, her hands gripping her robe tight around her. I reached for my radio. Dispatch, I have reason to believe there was an intruder in this residence. Send backup. I let go of the radio. Then slowly, I reached for the closet door. My fingers brushed the wood. I pulled the door open fast, gun raised. Empty. Just coats. A few old shoe boxes stacked against the back wall. Nothing else. But the air inside? It was warm, like someone had just been standing there. I stepped closer, my pulse pounding. Something about this wasn't right. The coats were slightly pushed to one side, like someone had moved through them. And the dust on the floor? Disturbed. Small scuff marks near the baseboards. Then I noticed it. A small gap in the back panel of the closet. Not enough to see through, but just enough to mean one thing. There was space behind this wall. My grip on my gun tightened. I ran my hand along the panel, pressing lightly. And it moved. A door. I swallowed hard. My training told me to wait for backup. But something about this. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I waited, I'd miss whatever I was about to find. So I took a breath and pushed the panel open. Darkness. A narrow, hidden space. Maybe 3 feet wide. No lights. The walls unfinished, just wooden beams and insulation. And at the far end, a small mattress. Blankets. A water bottle. And a pile of crumpled papers. I exhaled slowly, stepping inside. My flashlight cut through the dark, casting long shadows on the walls. Whoever had been in here, they had been here recently. I crouched down, picking up one of the papers. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. The first words made my stomach drop. I watched from the walls. My breath hitched. I grabbed another. She doesn't know. And another. Don't let him hear you. My whole body went rigid. Who was him? My mind raced. The woman had lived here alone for years. Had someone been in these walls that whole time? Watching her? Moving through hidden spaces while she slept. I stood up fast, backing toward the closet. I needed to get out of here. Then, a noise. A soft creak behind me. I spun around, flashlight shaking. Nothing. But the air had changed. The space felt smaller, like I wasn't alone. I backed out fast, stepping into the house, my heart hammering. I slammed the panel shut and turned toward the front door. The woman was still outside, arms wrapped around herself, watching me with wide, terrified eyes. I locked the closet. I didn't know what else to do. By the time backup arrived, the hidden space had been searched. No signs of recent activity, no footprints leading in or out. The papers were bagged as evidence. But there was no sign of him. Whoever had been in that house, he was gone. Or maybe, he was never really there. That's what I told myself. That's what I wanted to believe. But later that night, dispatch called me. They had reviewed the 911 recording. I almost didn't want to hear it, but I listened. The faint breathing, the shaky silence. Then, right before the call ended, a whisper. A voice so soft I almost missed it. Don't leave me here with him.